This is the lesson for 12-8 day 3. What we're looking at today is we're only looking at part of the quadratic formula today. That part of the quadratic formula that I highlighted here, the b squared minus 4ac, that is called the discriminant, all right? Another word for discriminant is the radicand. Technically, this is the discriminant, the b squared minus 4ac, and the answer that you get from that is really the radicand, all right? But if you just call it the discriminant, that's okay as well. So we're only taking a look at that part of the formula. From that part of the quadratic formula, you can determine whether there is no solution, one solution, or two solutions when you just use that b squared minus 4ac part. When you do that, if you get an answer that is positive, all right, so maybe you put the numbers in and you get an answer of 25 underneath the square root symbol. That means there's really two solutions to the answer. When we would break it off into, when we split it in the plus or minus, and it would split, there would be two different answers there when we go to solve it. If the radicand equals 0, so when you do this and you do b squared minus 4ac, if we get a 0 underneath that square root symbol, there's actually only one solution. You wouldn't be able to, or when you split it into two with the plus and minus, it would be the same answer on both sides. And then if the radicand is negative, there are 0 solutions. Remember, 0 solutions, that's when you have a negative underneath the square root symbol. That's an imaginary number. You can't take the square root of a negative number. So there are 0 solutions. So again, we're working with the discriminant, that is the b squared minus 4ac part of the quadratic formula today. So an example of one that is two solutions. First of all, you always have to look and make sure that your equation is set equal to 0. Now, all of the ones in the notes here today are all set equal to 0 already. We talked about setting them equal to 0 yesterday. You will have some in your homework that you have to rearrange first and get equal to 0, but all the ones in the notes today are already set equal to 0. So just double check that before you start identifying parts and pieces. So again, the first thing that I would personally do is I would personally identify my A, B, and C first. So remember that when there's a letter by itself, there's really a 1 in front of it. So my A value is equal to -1 here. My B value is the number in front of my X. So my B value is -7. And my C value is my -12. So all that you're going to do is sub those numbers into the formula. You still have to be careful with the negatives when you go to square it. Just like we've been careful in the quadratic formula, you have to be careful here. This is inside parentheses, -7 squared minus 4 times our A value of -1 times our C value of -12. You can type this whole thing right into the calculator all at once. When you do and type that into the calculator, you get an answer of 1, all right? When you get that answer of 1, 1 is positive, all right? 1 is a positive number. So that means there are 2 solutions to this quadratic equation. Just to sort of prove it to you, all right, if we went and subbed this into the actual quadratic formula, we would have -b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac. Now, I know that that's already 1, so I'm sort of going to cheat here. That's already 1 because I figured it out over here. All over 2 times a, so 2 times -1. So the negative of -7 would be +7 plus or minus the square root of 1 all over -2. So square root of 1 is just 1. So I have 7 plus or minus 1 all over -2. I would have to split this into being 7 plus 1 over -2 and 7 minus 1 over -2. 7 plus 1 is 8. 8 divided by -2 is -4. So that's one of our answers. 7 minus 1 is 6. 6 divided by -2 is -3. So you can see that by having this discriminant of 1, which is a positive number, it could be any positive number whatsoever. By having that being a positive number, there ended up being 2 different solutions in the end. Let's do one that has a 1 solution. Well, again, our A value is going to be 2. Our B value is going to be negative 16. Our C value is going to be 32. Notice again that my equation was set equal to 0 already. If it's not, you have to rearrange it. So we have negative 16 inside parentheses squared minus 4 times A times C. So when you go and type that into the calculator, you end up with an answer of 0. When it is 0, that is 1 solution, all right? It's very tempting to say, oh, it's going to have no solutions. That's not true, all right? Let me show it to you in the actual formula itself. Negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac. Now, I already did the b squared minus 4ac, so I know that that's 0 underneath there. And then 2 times a, 2 times 2. So the negative of negative 16 would be positive 16 plus or minus the square root of 0 over 4. When we take a look at the square root of 0, the square root of 0 is just 0. So I have 16 plus 0 over 4, and I have 16 minus 0 over 4. Now, adding 0 and subtracting 0 end up being the same thing. So that's why we only get 1 solution, because we have 16 over 4 and we have 16 over 4. We only get 1 answer. All right, our answer is just 4. It ends up being the same on both sides after we split it. All right, so that's why there ends up being only 1 solution, because when you add 0 or subtract 0, it ends up being the same thing. Let me show you what a no solution looks like. So again, identify your A, your B, and your C. So 2 is going to be my A. There's really a 1 in front of here. So 1 is going to be my B. And my C term is going to be 4. So B squared, 1 squared, minus 4 times A times C. You could type that right into the calculator again. When you do that, you end up with negative 31. Negative 31 is a negative number. So that has to be no solution. Why it has to be no solution is because when we go to fill it into the actual quadratic formula, you end up with that negative 31 underneath the square root symbol. All right. So because that negative 31, you can't take the square root of a negative number. That's an imaginary number. So therefore, it has to be no solution. You can't solve it any farther. You can't go any farther than that because you can't take the square root of a negative number. So that is no solution. So what do these look like graphically? Especially in the next chapter, we're going to be doing things both algebraically and graphically. If we went and typed these in, because remember, we could just, instead of having it equal to 0, we could say that this was the f of x or y equals. You could type this right into the calculator and graph it. You could type it into the y equals and graph it and look at your zeros. All right, look at your zeros or your roots. You have a 1 right there where it crosses the x-axis, 1 right there. Notice that we have 2 solutions. If we did the, if we found the discriminant, we would have negative 2 squared minus 4 times A times C. And when we would go and do this, you end up with 64 as your discriminant. So 64 is a positive number, therefore it has 2 solutions. Take a look. Notice that it crosses it at the x-axis at 2 places. Remember, those are your roots. Those are your answers, all right? Those are your zeros. Those are your x-intercepts. All those things mean the same exact thing. In one solution, all right, remember, you can really take this and put it into your y equals or f of x equals. If we did this one, we would have negative 6 squared minus 4 times A times C. When we go to type this one in, you'd get a discriminant of 0. Well, that discriminant of 0, notice that this only touches the x-axis in one place if we want to graph this one. This one only has one solution. It's right there, all right? It's at 3. So it only has one solution. It only crosses at it only touches the x-axis at one point. So it only has one root or 1, 0. No solution. If we went and graphed this one, we would end up with this picture. Notice that this picture does not cross the x-axis whatsoever. So therefore, it doesn't have any roots. If we went and typed this one into the discriminant, we would have negative 16 when you go and type that into the calculator. Notice that that does not cross this x-axis whatsoever. Therefore, it has no solution. So that's sort of what they look like graphically. All that we care about today is you're going to have to solve for the discriminant, get this answer. You're going to have to say how many solutions there are. If there is 1 or 2 solutions, you're going to have to find the answers to those, just like I did over here. Then you'll have to take them and find the actual answers.